Thank you for pressing start on episode 34 of Underplayed, KZUM's indie video game podcast. Today we have 2 secret games, followed by a review of our featured game, Cult of the Lamb. Here on Underplayed, we review indie games of all kinds, the games with small budgets but big hearts, the lesser-known experiences with imaginative ideas. I'm Bopo. Joining me, as always, is my player 2, DiscoCola. What is going on, DiscoCola?
Oh, not too much. I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. My one who waits. That's a reference to our featured game, Cult of the Lamb, which is our first featured game of Season 4 of Underplayed.
Yeah, we've been gone so long, I forgot that I'm supposed to make a reference to the game at the top.
Do you want to go back and make one?
Okay. I can't think of one right now.
I actually just remembered to think of one like hours ago before we did this recording. So thankfully we got one in there. If you're just tuning into this podcast, welcome. And we thank you so much for listening to Underplayed. This is a podcast that's all about indie games and indie game reviews. And DiscoCola, since it is the start of a season, I thought it would be helpful to just run down what the gist of our show is, what a typical episode looks like. Would you be able to help me with that?
Yeah, so at the start of the episode, we will try and sometimes fail to make a little reference to our featured game. But every episode, we have a featured game, which both of us will play and discuss in the latter part of the episode. But before we get to that point, each of us has, in private, picked another indie game that we have played on our own, and we don't tell each other about it. So the really cool part about Underplayed is that we each get to come to the recording, and the other does not know what we've played. So I've got something that I'm really excited to talk to Bopo about. He has no idea what it's going to be. He has no idea what I'm going to say. And that's just really fun. A fun way to talk about 3 indie games in one episode.
Yes. And so over the course of a season, we do 10 of those kinds of episodes. So we talk about 30 games in a season. Then we usually do an 11th episode where we look back at those 10 previous episodes and we give out awards, we reflect on what we played, and then we plan the featured games for the next season. And if you want to see what those featured games are, or at least hear about them, you can go to episode 33, which is the 11th episode of season 3, and you can get a preview of all the games we picked. That's at the very tail end of the episode after we talk about season 3 games. So great variety this season in terms of our featured games. I'm looking forward to everything we picked. And our first one's going to be Cult of the Lamb here in season 4. Now, I wanted to just also say, hey, if you're tuning in and you're like, oh, it's season 4, do I need to go back to season 1? Not really. No, you can start anywhere with our show. Our show is not meant to be consumed in, a particular order. You can go to any episode, really. So if you want to start with season 1, you can do that. This is a great jumping on point, I would argue.
Yeah, we only have like one inside joke, and we kind of killed it in season 3 anyway.
Right.
And maybe occasionally we'll make references to other games that we have played. Mm-hmm. But we also make references to mainstream AAA games. So it's just a matter of what your gaming knowledge is.
Yeah, so sometimes we do reference our thoughts from a long time ago, but if you're listening, you kind of get it. We give you all the information as you go along. So hopefully we are friendly to those new listeners of you just picking up here. I wanted to just ask you, DiscoCola, how are you doing? I already kind of asked you, as part of our normal intro, and that's our throwaway, like, oh, I'm doing just fine sort of answer. But how are you really doing?
How am I actually doing?
How are you actually doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a mostly, I had a lot of time to do some stuff over the break, but it was also really stressful. My kids got sick most of the weeks we were on break, just sort of traded back and forth. And then
I'm sorry. That sucks.
Me and my wife got sick, after them. So a lot of sickness, a lot of screwed up work schedules, but pretty good otherwise, I would say. How have you been?
I have been really good, busy with work. Playing lots of games that aren't indie games during our break. Since while we're working on a season, we're just exclusively playing indie games pretty much.
Yeah.
So I actually played a lot of things I didn't expect to play. And they're things that kind of surround some of the stuff we talked about concerning the 3DS eShop last season.
Nice.
So
yeah.
talked about that stuff. First, do you want to talk about what you played during the break?
Yes, I do. I finally ran credits on Digimon Survive.
Oh my gosh. Now, I might be conflating two different games. But is this the game you've kind of been talking about since season 1 or 2?
It would have been 2. Yeah,
Okay.
it came out right at the end of 2.
Yeah.
It's a visual novel game, which is a first for a Digimon game, but the battle style is like a grid tactics style. So it's mostly a visual novel game, first and foremost. And so unfortunately, that means there's several endings, and it took me this long to just get the first one.
Oh, no.
Luckily, there's like a really good and useful skip button to like skip through dialogue you've already seen, like in Doki Doki Literature Club.
I use that constantly. Yes.
But I only just ran credits before I moved on to another game. I played Solar Ash, and I started in hardcore mode. And let me tell you, I did not struggle with it quite as hard as you made it sound like I would until a certain point. And I spent 4 hours on just one boss, and like 2.5 of those hours were just trying to get that last hit. I still have to finish it though, because if I don't finish it soon, I'll forget how to play.
Exactly. That's how I looked at it when I first attempted the hardcore mode. I did that first remnant, who's just the introductory remnant, just basic.
Yeah.
I could not defeat it
Yeah.
in hardcore. And I don't think I tried, for 2, 3, 4 hours like you did on some of these remnants so far. But I got to the point, like 90 minutes maybe of trying to get that third hit.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. And then I thought, well, there are X many remnants after this. How the heck am I going to do that? And they get harder and harder.
Yeah. And I didn't have too much trouble with like Remnant 2 compared to the first one. And Remnant 3 was like a struggle, but not as bad. But man, Remnant 4, the Withered Eye. Pain in my butt. He was my favorite boss before. Now I hate him.
I remember us talking about that one enthusiastically.
Yeah. I think if I may just like dig into the mechanics for a second, I think the mechanics are optimized for a mouse and keyboard. Because I'm noticing that my melee slash isn't exactly consistent, and I think that in addition to where your dash boots go is dependent on where your camera is behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's sort of optimized for a mouse, because I feel like I'm doing the same moves over and over, but sometimes if my camera's not pointed in the exact right direction, I'll miss a slash that I would otherwise hit.
Yeah, there are those games that where there are just certain inputs that would be faster with that mouse.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about that with a couple games before. And I think when I've seen speedruns, it was a PC player, just because they have that extra control.
But yeah, so I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to focus on it as much, especially because the next 2 games I have in episode 2 are going to take me a little while. But just maybe one night a weekend, I'll try it and try and crank it out.
You'll sip on that game.
Yeah. But the thing I played the most was Outer Wilds. And I have totally completed this game, DLC, and I'm really excited for you to play Echoes of the Eye eventually.
Yeah.
I think you will like parts of it, and I think you will hate other parts of it. So I'm really interested to see what you say, and then I've consumed a lot of like extra lore media outside of the game. I've really kind of fallen in love with the game in a way I didn't before.
Whoa, that is awesome. Now, I remember I scored that game higher than you in season 1.
Yeah.
Would you score it like up where I was scoring it
I
now?
think I put it at like an 8.5 or a 9. Let me see.
Yeah,
I put it at 8.5.
Oh, okay.
I probably still wouldn't boost it higher because there's still a lot of like mechanics in that game that are really frustrating, and I feel like waste my time in ways that I would prefer it didn't. But I love it a lot more, and I have a lot more affection for it just in general.
Nice. You did some of the hard stuff like the getting to the sun station.
Oh, yeah.
In your ship. That's so hard to do.
The hardest trophy is actually a DLC trophy where you have to surf on a wave. That is horribly difficult.
Real. I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I know very little about the DLC other than I've heard it might be more traditionally horrific.
Yeah, I don't totally understand that classification, if I'm totally honest.
Okay.
But it's a bit strange compared to the base game.
Okay. Well, since you did get the platinum here, let me just
Oh, okay.
just I don't even know if this. I think that was just a normal trophy sound.
It's fine.
It was you. There we go. We want that one.
Oh,
that's the one we want.
Thank you.
And I think it was a little soft, but I can boost it in post.
Okay. What did you play over the break,
Oh my
Bopo?
gosh. I played way more titles than I expected to. I thought I would get to like 5 or 6 games.
I think I was monitoring your play sessions a little bit, but I totally forgot what you played.
Well, you wouldn't have even been able to know about so many of these because on the heels of the 3DS store closing, or actually just before it closed, I went on a buying spree. I think we both did. I bought tons of stuff. And then, I just found myself getting into this 3DS kick where
Nice.
I wanted to play all these games I just bought. But I ended up playing in roughly this order. And I finished all these games too, just so you know.
Okay.
Star Fox 64 3D. I had never played a Star Fox game ever. And so this was the 3DS version of the N64
Yay,
game.
nay?
Fun.
Okay.
You can beat it in one sitting, and there's like branching paths. I didn't have a desire to go back and do those branching paths. It was more to play it to appreciate the history of that franchise.
Fair
so
enough.
now I can say that I've played a Star Fox game. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to do that. WarioWare Gold. I had never played a WarioWare game. Very fun. I was addicted to this for like 2 or 3 days.
I've heard nothing but great stuff about WarioWare.
Yes, and this game particularly, from what I can tell, is a great one to play if you can only choose one. And it has tons of the mini games from like past games and new games, so it's just a great collection. Then a game that turns 10 this year. A lot of these games are, roughly that age, but The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
This was a big title on my Legend of Zelda pile of shame. I wanted to beat it within a fairly short window. And so if I got stuck, I didn't beat my head against the wall terribly long before looking up a solution. So I did use assistance for it, and I didn't mind that. So finished that one. New Super Mario Brothers 2. And I have played like every other mainline Mario platforming game, except this one. So this was a big blind spot for me as well. This one was fun. It was more fun than the original New Super Mario Brothers for me.
Okay.
And it's very focused on collecting coins.
I was going to say, yeah, that's the one with gold coins all over the cover.
That game like showers you with gold coins, and that's like the theme of this specific one. So I like that it stands out because of that. Another one, I think by the same developers, the same people as like who did WarioWare Gold. Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix. This is another game where you're playing like mini games, but it's really rhythm focused. And I've played Rhythm Heaven Fever on the Wii, and I really liked that game. And this is another collection, kind of like WarioWare Gold. It takes tons of Rhythm Heaven mini games from past entries, and it just is like this collection. So had fun with that. This really tiny title called Kersploosh that, again, I beat this in one sitting, and it's just a game where you are an object falling down a well, and the perspective is from top down. So you're seeing like from the perspective of the object falling down the well, and you're avoiding obstacles in the well. And you're just trying to get to the water at the bottom of the well as fast as you can.
Ooh.
So if you hit something, it slows you down. And this was just like really inexpensive, and it was one of those exclusive 3DS games. Like it's only on 3DS. I saw it in a video of like obscure titles you need to buy before they're unavailable forever. And so I just picked this up for a few bucks. And then last thing on 3DS was I picked up Fire Emblem Awakening, and I did not finish this one, but I am currently like 75% done. It is a long game.
Nice.
It's like a 25, 30-hour game maybe. I'm on chapter like 21 of 25, so kind of approaching the end of that one. That's one I've been kind of like sipping on. So I'll probably like play once or twice a week is all. Then I finished Metroid Dread on Switch.
Yes, you told me.
I told you that one.
Yes.
And I had gotten through like 50% of that game last year and put it down. And I was surprised at how quickly I picked it back up, actually, because you had said there's a big danger in putting this down because you'll forget everything. But this is a really intuitive Metroidvania where you can like figure out where you were fairly easily. So I didn't really have to look up what to do. It came back to me. So that was a huge surprise. And I had a blast with this. I finished this arcade racing game called Cruisin' Blast that I also started a while back on Switch. And then on PlayStation, I platinumed Far Cry 4. I did the DLC for Far Cry 4, which is Valley of the Yetis. So I got 100% on that game. And then I played Control.
Oh, okay.
Control Ultimate Edition. I got the platinum in it. I 100%ed it. I did both DLC expansions, which are extensive.
Wow.
So I put a ton of time into that game. Like it was longer than I thought it would be. Had fun with that one too. So I did a ton. That's it.
You've been busy.
I've been very busy.
That's it.
That's our break has been, it seems like it goes by fast, but there's a lot of time in there to do all this stuff. So yeah. So that's where we're at. I think it's finally time to move on to our secret games.
Secret games. Secret games. Secret games. Secret games.
In secret games, we each bring an indie game we've been playing in secret and we reveal it to each other. And we don't know what we picked. We can pick any game as long as it's not an indie game we've talked about before, and as long as it isn't a potential featured game that we've vetted outside of our show. So almost anything goes. We will start with you, DiscoCola. Let the mystery be no more. Reveal your secret game for episode 34 of Underplayed.
Now, over the break, I messaged you and asked about acknowledging games that cross our threshold into becoming featured. This one just came out, and I'm confident that if it isn't quite there yet, it probably will be. I could have waited to see, but I was a little bit selfish, and I really wanted to play this one right away.
I'm very scared.
For the opening secret game of Season 4, I played a game from Free Lives, and that game is called Terra Nil.
Oh, yes, you've talked about this so much to me. You've been highly anticipating Terra Nil.
I have.
Okay,
I sent you the trailer.
I will watch it while you talk.
So, Terra Nil is a resource management city builder game that works on a grid. And in the city builder, though, your goal is to remove remnants of cities and other human scourges from an abandoned Earth. In Terra Nil, you visit 4 different zones, each with a different climate. Those are temperate, tropical, polar, and continental. And at the start of each level, you begin with a small amount of energy to begin building different kinds of buildings that are meant to clean or otherwise restore the natural environment of that area. So we saw in that trailer that you have, things that create greenery or cause a natural fire or create trees. So there's a bunch of different things. So for example, when you begin in the temperate zone, essentially that is just a giant dirt patch with a small river, the possibility of a small river running through it. But the ground and the water are heavy polluted, and there's no vegetation or life of any kind that can survive there. And many of your buildings aren't even able to be built on that polluted ground. So it becomes your job to first create an energy source, like a windmill, for example, in the first level, and attach buildings to it that will remove toxins from the tiles around it. Every building costs your green energy, but you can gain more of that green energy points by cleaning the tiles with toxin scrubbers, and then you can use irrigators to plant greenery on those clean tiles in the surrounding area. And that's pretty much how each level starts. You might focus on removing toxins from water instead in some areas that have water. And each zone also gives you a checklist of milestones for temperature, humidity, and in some cases toxicity or radiation in order to restore certain elements like moss on rocks or coral in the seas. As you restore nature to the map, you also need to focus on where you place each types of nature, because eventually you will be able to scan for wildlife like polar bears and deer and timber wolves and so many more. But those animals will only begin appearing in places or in tiles where it is near all of its requirements. So, for example, maybe polar bears are in the game, and they will need to be near so many tiles that contain a prey animal, as well as so many tiles of ocean, as well as so many tiles covered in snow. And only then, when you select a tile that's near all of those requirements, will they reappear.
So this is where you can potentially customize how you approach an area by like what you focus on, and then that impacts the fauna that can show up.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, but and I'll get more into the weeds on that a little bit later. It doesn't always it's not always easy to do that
Okay.
in a way that actually sustains life.
Okay.
When you get to the end, when you've decided that you've fulfilled as many of your optional tasks as you want to fulfill on your checklists, you must recycle every building that you have built, and then you leave. And once you've packed everything up, you leave and move on to the next zone, and then you rinse and repeat. So, I want to get into some things that I like about the game. First and foremost, the general design and concept. I personally am always trying to be as green conscious as possible, while also still driving a 15-year-old combustible engine vehicle and collecting plastic toys and physical copies of video games. So I'm incredibly far from perfect, but I'm also often thinking about the best possible thing I can do or not do to best support biodiversity.
Living in a capitalist society, there's a certain agreement you make to do things that are uncomfortable, and how much of that you do that you can choose to do versus like what's out of your control is kind of something you have to reckon with.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. And I even have ideals that would qualify as, if I may use a word that I first heard from you, some of my ideals are even anti-infrastructure. So this game does speak to me, even though I don't get to practice these things as well as I would like. Sound design is another strong point. With a game whose structure is about as simple as you can get, with a few exceptions, maybe point and click might be the simplest form of game. You need some great feedback, and I think that the sound effects in Terra Nil really nail this. Every time I build an irrigator, I get a cool little tile animation and a satisfying, watery, clicky sound as each dirt tile transforms into a beautiful plot of lush life. Even recycling buildings has a satisfying sound that makes me feel like I'm taking something apart and earning something at the same time. I like the checklist for each area, manipulating humidity and temperature to ensure that you get the most out of your ecosystem adds an extra layer of activity to things that are less interesting to play with. You can't see when you're manipulating temperature. It doesn't change the color of your map in any way. So allowing me to add moss onto rocks by messing with items that adjust temperature, that's an interesting way to encourage me to play with stuff that I wouldn't otherwise care about. And it makes me think about things like moss, which is something I just don't usually think about, but now I have a better understanding of just how delicate moss is in terms of what they require to survive. So
you're learning in this
I'm
game.
learning.
It's educational.
Yeah, I don't think it's like 100% spot on with the science, probably.
Right.
Like,
but you're more mindful about some of these
Yeah,
things. Like you
absolutely.
weren't thinking about that before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like the dev team. I don't know too much about them, but the dev team donated or is still donating 8% of their profits to the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and I think that's a pretty stinking cool thing to do.
Yeah.
I liked the concept for the ending. On the 4th level, you are recycling all of your materials, but you are also building something unique to this level at the same time. And I say that I like the concept because, and now I have to move into things that I don't like, the ending is bugged.
Oh, what?
Yeah, the
Okay.
ending's a little bit bugged. I don't think it gives a ton away when I say you have to, quote, recall the satellite before you can finish your final task. However, despite having everything else done, I was not able to recall the satellite, and therefore I cannot finish the game. Some people that ran into this were able to reset the level and try it all again and make it work. Some people have tried that and it didn't work, and they basically had to start the whole game over. Unfortunately, the fourth level and final level is one of the most tedious of the levels, and I didn't really have time to just reset my save on that. The whole game is pretty short, but I couldn't spend that time without even the guarantee that I would succeed in the end. So it's another incomplete on my record, but unlike Rain World, this one is mostly out of my hands, I would say. Another thing I don't really like is that the UI can be a little obstructive. Each time you hover over an option in the building menu, it pops up a screen showing you exactly what the building does. But sometimes you can accidentally hover over an option when what you're actually trying to do is place an item in a specific tile near the bottom of the screen. And so this pop-up window gets in your way.
You can't select the squares you want.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and now you just have to reset your mouse and start over. It's a minor inconvenience, you would say, but it gets on my nerves when it happens a lot, and it does happen a lot.
Okay.
Now, this is something I alluded to earlier. Prepping for certain animals can be incredibly difficult because you don't see what they require ahead of time. You have to progress a decent amount into each zone before animals are even acknowledged in that level. So if you have a very particular animal, but you built your ecosystem in a way that can't support it, like maybe you need a forest near high structures. If you've built all your forest in the lower part of the ground, what are you to do? So that can be really frustrating, especially despite the ease that our culture has in destroying nature. This game doesn't make it easy to actually destroy nature. You saw in the trailer that you can you can light fires.
Yes.
But the buildings that light the fires are very particular. You can only build them on certain tiles.
Oh.
And they don't necessarily always burn the correct things down.
Okay. So you're not selecting what it does. It's automatic.
Well, you do select what burns down, but what it burns down is like specific. Like
Okay.
it doesn't necessarily burn down a forest. I had a lot of trouble with it. I don't remember the specifics of it at this point.
It's good you mentioned all those points because, like, just me not having played this game, looking at the trailer, I can't tell that this thing can only be built on certain tiles. It just looks like something, as long as you have enough tiles.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I just remember like more than one occasion where I was like, I need to burn this. Please let me let me burn, please.
Sure.
And I just couldn't.
Okay.
And then that brings me to my last and probably most significant dislike is that you can really paint yourself into a corner really easily in this game. You can do so well scrubbing toxins and growing greenery and excavating earth for more ocean tiles, but then you end up in a position where you don't have the necessary surfaces to build buildings on top of. Even after packing up your other items, you won't necessarily be able to place something down directly where you just had something. Just some buildings are that particular. And sometimes nature is already taking its own course and there's snow on that ground and you just have to battle with snow now and you can't build on top of it. So this can prevent you from getting some of the finishing touches that you need on levels if you aren't able to plan ahead. And sometimes you just aren't able to plan ahead. So many of the complaints about Terra Nil are in regards to the short length or becoming bored after a couple of levels due to repetitive tasks that are sort of samey in each zone. Unfortunately, I kind of agree with those complaints. In spite of that, though, I still found myself fascinated with how the landscape would slowly change into its complete self, and all of the great feedback gave me all the great endorphins along the way. This is a game that is good for a lot of people, but it isn't something I would recommend that you sit down and try to beat in 1 or 2 sittings. Unfortunately, though, certain things don't save and you can't necessarily just pick up where you left off, not without redoing a couple of things. I think this is something that could be akin to unpacking if just a couple of things were tweaked. Overall, though, I enjoyed the game and I still recommend it to most people. And while I hope to reevaluate after the release day fog clears, I'm currently sitting at about a 7.0 out of 10 for Terra Nil.
7 out of 10. All right. Yeah, so I wonder if some of those frustrations will be addressed over time. Like definitely the stuff that prevents you from finishing.
Yeah.
That's got to be something that's patched because that's not just happening for you, right?
Yes, but it isn't happening for everyone.
Okay, so it's not like a terribly widespread thing. I did double check just to see, like, is this an early access game? And it doesn't look like it is. It looks like this is the actual release that happened on March 28th.
Yes.
So it's not like it is in a more experimental phase. It is in the release phase. Did you mention how many zones there were? You talked about the different like environments,
Yeah.
the kinds of environments. How many like levels or stages or zones are
So
there?
there's 4 zones, so the 4 climates that I mentioned. And then once you complete the 4th zone, I believe you can go back and play remixed versions of those maps. Because if you 100% each of the first 4 zones, that only accounts for 70% completion on the main menu.
Okay.
So there's a remixed version of something, but I don't know what that entails
Gotcha.
at this point.
As you're placing things down, you're the quote unquote God character, you're creating the things. Is there characterization to who you are placing the things? Like, is there a corporation that's named, or is it just unnamed, unaddressed, uncommented on?
Yeah. No. The closest thing you get to being personified in any way is your hovercraft that shows up at the end of the level, which you saw in the trailer there.
Gotcha. All right. I love the recycling idea. The idea that you think you're done, but no, you have to pack up everything. Like you need to leave. You can't leave behind traces of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I like that. It definitely fits the theme of like bringing these climates back to life. And then you talked about like nature kind of moving and starting to reclaim things maybe before you're able to do certain tasks. Would you say that when you're dropped into a zone or you start a zone, that things are pretty urgent and you can't just go at your own pace? Or is it more of a go at your own pace sort of feeling?
It's go at your own pace until a point. Essentially, when you recreate a climate that supports precipitation is what makes the difference. But at the start of each zone, things are basically dead. So you can take your time for a while. But once you start creating rain or snow or other weather events, that's when things start to have a life of their own.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I know this is one you've been looking forward to for a long time. And yeah, you talked about this might be more of a featured game sort of title in the future, especially as more people play it and it gets more recognition. But between the two of us, I'm glad you're the one who picked this for a secret game if it had to be one of us, because you've just been so excited about this. You've been following all the trailers, all the updates. I haven't been doing that so much, but I've really liked the idea from a distance. So glad you got to play this. What platforms is it on?
All right. Terra Nil is on Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and Linux.
And I assume you played on PC?
I did, yeah.
Through Steam?
Yes.
Okay, got it. It is time for my secret game. My secret game this episode is called Tangle Tower. Have you heard of Tangle Tower?
Not even a little bit.
Okay, well, I just sent you a trailer.
All right, I'm going to check this out. Let's see what this is all about here.
So Tangle Tower is a game I have a lot to say about.
Oh dear, I immediately love these visuals.
I'm glad you do. They're great visuals. I'll get to everything about this game in a second, but I just want to let you know this game is like 5 or 6 hours long. So it's not like the longest game that I've played for a secret game. I have so many thoughts about this, and I don't know how long this will end up being, but I apologize if it is way too long, because there's just so much to comment on with this. This is a 2019 point-and-click detective game developed and published by SFB Games. I will read the game synopsis from the Steam storefront. Quote, unravel a thrilling mystery by exploring a strange and twisted mansion, discovering curious clues, interrogating peculiar suspects, and solving unique puzzles. Will you be able to uncover the secrets of Tangle Tower? Ends quote. So in Tangle Tower, it is a point-and-click adventure following 2 characters, Detective Grimoire and his assistant Sally. And they are summoned to the titular Tangle Tower. Tangle Tower is this mansion with many distinct rooms. There's a library, an astronomy tower, a music room, just to name a few. There are over 20 locations to search, and there are two families that inhabit and coexist in Tangle Tower. There's the Fellows and the Pointers, and the various family members of both sides have histories and relationships and feuds with each other. And Grimoire and Sally have been asked by an anonymous resident to solve the murder of one of the Fellows named Freya, who was this young girl who died while painting a portrait of her family member named Flora. And Grimoire and Sally arrive at Tangle Tower, and they have this case file with a rundown of what transpired. And so they know what they're stepping into a little bit. And that case file reads, quote, "Murder victim Freya Fellow, 19, died whilst painting a portrait of Flora Fellow, 58. Location, Flora's Tower. Flora was present as she was posing for a portrait. Freya Fellow was found lying on her back with a single stab wound on her chest. No weapon was found at the crime scene, but the subject of Freya's unfinished painting is holding a knife. The red color on the tip of the knife is not paint. It was discovered to be blood." End quote. So a lot of weird things going on just in that premise, and it only gets weirder from there.
I think I've seen that episode of Monk, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you would know. I've never seen that. But yeah, it's that kind of premise where there's a lot of confusion to the setup. So you immediately think, the prime suspect might be Flora because she was the one being painted by Freya. So Grimoire and Sally interview Flora after examining the painting. But the problem is that Flora doesn't speak and hasn't spoken for a long time, so she cannot give any useful information to the detectives, at least at first. And it also turns out that the family members of both the Fellows and the Pointers have ties to Freya and all these separate pieces of a large tapestry, a tangled web, if you will, to reveal. And so there are 8 primary suspects in this game that you interview and explore. So there are some Fellows. There's Flora, Fifi, Fitz, and Felix Fellow.
Oh, great.
And then there's Penny, Poppy, and Percival Pointer. And lastly, there's Detective Hawkshaw, who is an outsider. It's the only character not originally from Tangle Tower. And Detective Hawkshaw was hired to investigate something mysterious before Freya died. And so Hawkshaw was at Tangle Tower when this murder happened. So this other detective who doesn't work with Grimoire and Sally is a suspect. So there are 3 primary activities you do in Tangle Tower to follow the case. First, there's questioning the suspects. And this is where you're asking everyone just who they are. You make introductions with them, and you get their statements about the murder or about what they know about the murder. And then you explore the environments looking for evidence and clues, which show up in an inventory screen when you pick things up. And almost everything in each of the environments can be clicked on and commented on by the detectives as well. And then the third main activity is interacting with certain objects that require you to solve a puzzle. Usually involving examining symbols or creating shapes or arranging items in a certain way until you unlock the puzzle, and then you get to keep that item. And they're usually for some of the more important pieces of evidence in the game. So once you have enough information from talking and exploring and looking at your clues, Grimoire and Sally will realize suspicions about something going on. They'll recognize how clues and information tie into each other. And then that unlocks the ability to revisit each of the suspects to interrogate them further. And at this point, you can create an inference that incorporates motives and items. And so this is where you as the player are using your understanding of the story to create logical conclusions to continue the story. And you see a little bit of it in the trailer, but it's where you're making a sentence of like 4 parts, and each part has multiple options. And so you need to scroll through the options until you figure out what that combination is to continue the case. And just because you make these sentences and they're correct doesn't mean that that's actually the final truth of the mystery. It's just what allows you to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get the sentence that Grimoire and Sally are thinking about, but that's not necessarily the truth at the very end of the game. So the truth and their understanding and their hypotheses evolve over time. And then along the way, you're discovering this really dense history with the Fellows and the Pointers, these two families in Tangle Tower. And there are other families that intersect with them. There's a family tree in this game, and there are like 23 names on that family tree. And there are other families that married into the Pointers and the Fellows. And so you see like those names too. They have backstories and things, but primarily it's the Fellows and Pointers, which is why I just mentioned those up top. All the conversations in the game are both displayed in on-screen text and they're fully voice acted. You can listen to that in the trailer. All the environments have this painterly art style, and the characters will show up on screen during dialogue with lots of animation and expression. And this game uses this effect that I have seen in animations before, but I never knew the technical term for it until I researched this game. And it's called squiggle vision. Do you know? You probably can tell what it is just from the name.
Yeah, so if you've seen the show Home Movies.
Yeah, that's the one that came to my mind.
Yep.
Yeah. So squiggle vision is where outlines of characters are constantly sort of jittering to make them appear more alive. It gives this breathing look to a character, even if they're not moving any part of their body at any one moment. But these characters also move their arms. Their mouths move, their eyes blink. So they're very expressive in a number of ways. So that's the setup for Tangle Tower. So what I liked about Tangle Tower is a very intriguing whodunit with excellent characters. That's what I foremost note about this game. Everyone from the detectives to the suspects are perfectly voiced and distinct. There is Felix Fellow, who has this English accent. He's like, Felix Fellow at your service. And there's Fifi, who's this really nerdy, like laboratory girl. There's Penny, who's really uppity, and she's got this poshness to her. You've seen these kinds of characters in lots of murder mysteries, and they're kind of cliches, but it's a wide variety of those kinds of characters. So they all have so much personality. I can't think of a weak character at all, and they're all so good. Grimoire and Sally are an inspired duo. They each have their own traits, but they're equally perceptive and useful in this case. With Grimoire being like a little goofier, and he provides a lot of the comic relief, and then Sally's more, like even-keeled.
Yeah, very dry, it seems like.
Yes, she's wry, dry, like more serious. And while Sally is Grimoire's assistant, you'd think that she might be like the Watson to Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
But she actually is closer to being like this second Sherlock. Sally is like the Kim Kitsuragi of this game, where she is jumping in there with observations. She's doing just as much work as Grimoire is. And it's awesome seeing these two work things out from like slightly different perspectives. So she's not secondary. She's actually like very important.
She could probably be on her own. She probably just like hates answering the phone to take on new clients or something.
Yeah. Exactly. So they're great, a great duo. And then the writing is so varied because of all these different characters. Some characters will just talk and talk and talk. They're verbose. Some are down to earth. Some are more withholding. And this game is also affecting in its writing with moments of humor. There are great throwaway jokes. It'll happen just between Grimoire and Sally when you're poking around environments, clicking on things. You can click on like anything in this game and they'll have a different conversation. And so like in one of the opening screens, one moment of humor that comes to mind is they see a bandstand in like one of the garden areas. And one of them goes, "Is that a bandstand?" And the other one goes, "Yeah, that's a bandstand." And they go, "Well, it's kind of small for a bandstand." And then the other one goes, "It's a one-man bandstand." And just the stupidity of that, just the dad jokiness of that just got me. I laughed out loud several times playing this game, and it was usually just stupid things that I did not see coming like that. And they say it's a throwaway joke, and then they just keep going. And it's so good. There is another, there are moments of humor in how Grimoire and Sally respond to some of these suspects. There's a suspect just talking their legs off, just loquaciously talking.
Yeah, grinding down their teeth.
And you expect, how are they going to address all this stuff that was just spoken to them? The response to this is going to be good. And then Grimoire just goes, yep. And that's the interaction. And so love those moments. It takes some of the seriousness out of this murder mystery just for a moment. And there's levity too. So the game has the courage to be intelligent. It has the courage to be casual in all the right amounts. There are so many lines of dialogue. It's nothing like Hades or Disco Elysium, but each suspect can comment on each and every item that you pick up.
Whoa.
You can show a piece of evidence, and you can collect upwards of 50 or 60 clues and pieces of evidence.
That's no small feat.
And
wow.
so each of the 8 suspects will say something different for each of those clues. And so I was doing that. I was showing everybody everything and getting all the information. And it puts a little check mark on each one after they've spoken about it too.
That's so satisfying.
Every suspect can comment on every other suspect too. So I was exhausting all those possibilities. Also, I think perhaps my favorite moments in this game were when characters gave their statements, their alibis, when they recount their stories on the day the murder happened. You'll ask someone, okay, tell us what happened. What's from your perspective, what happened during the murder? And the screen dissolves into this map of Tangle Tower with all these little versions of the characters running around, reenacting what they're saying as they're saying it. And they're saying it how you would expect someone to recount a story. It's like, I was in my room doing this, and then I heard people shouting outside my door. And then this person came to my door and I answered. And then we went up to Flores Tower where the murder took place. And by the time we got there, this person and this person were already standing there. And this person was in this corner, looking this way. And then me and this other person went down and did this. And so they're talking about the before, during, and after. And it's actually quite a long scene that you're watching. And I loved seeing these moments because I started to compare them. When I heard more than one alibi, I was listening in close to all the consistencies and inconsistencies of the stories, and it made me pay attention. And there are things that change slightly between people's stories. So just the presentation of it, the idea of it, how well it's done, how good the voiceover sounds while you're listening to all this stuff play out. It's so confidently done. It's great. I wish there was more of that. And then the way all these characters animate and move their mouths is expressive. I love the squiggle vision stuff. The art has great detail. There's a great storybook feeling to how this game looks. The puzzles involving objects. This was one of the 3 main pillars of the gameplay. These were the right difficulty for me. I spent a good 15 to 30 minutes on some of them. But I also didn't look up any solutions. They were very satisfying to solve, and I wanted to keep just trying at them until I figured them out. And I did on all of them. So that was really satisfying. And then if you don't know where to go next, the game offers really helpful clues on where to go without telling you exactly what you need to do. Mm-hmm. So there's great hand-holding that doesn't do all the work for you in this game. So those are my likes with Tangle Tower. I did have dislikes, and I have a lot less dislikes than I have likes, but some of the dislikes I have for Tangle Tower are fairly significant.
Okay.
So although you're, looking for clues and solving puzzles and forming these conclusions, following the case can sometimes feel like too much of a passive experience where you are just sort of watching the story unfold. And then you go to the next place and then you watch the story unfold and you're clicking through and stuff, but you're not doing as much moment to moment to impact the story as you might think. The times when you do have interactivity are great. I love those moments, but there are just not as many of those puzzles as I would like in this 6-hour game. Mm-hmm. There are lots and lots of threads relating to motives and the family's history that are left unresolved by the end. So this is kind of a big problem I have with the story is you get so much information thrown at you, and a lot of it just doesn't tie up. And I understand that is kind of a trope in murder mysteries where you get all this information to throw you off the trail so that you can't easily figure it out. If there was too little information, it would be a very bland story and you'd be able to know what happened. But they also don't, they set up all of these plot lines that feel important and then they're kind of abandoned too.
Mhm.
So it just felt like there were perhaps too many red herrings that didn't go anywhere in this
Gotcha.
game.
Okay.
And then by the end, the game gets really rushed. The plot feels overwrought. Even though I just played the game, I don't think I could adequately tell you everything that happened. I don't
Okay.
think I could like sit here and spoil the game because so much happened at the end. So much was wrapped up. And a lot of it was like a little mysterious to me. So there's confusion at the end. The game ends so abruptly that it feels like something's missing at the end. And then minor annoyance, the alliteration of all the names that you probably noticed. The alliteration of all the names makes it hard to keep all the characters straight in my mind, especially when people are talking about Freya and Flora
Mhm.
or like Penny and Poppy. I always had to remind myself of who those people were.
Right.
Overall, Tangle Tower exceeds artistically. It's stronger in its smaller moments than when looking at the whole picture, in my opinion. It presents appropriately challenging puzzles, and that's when I felt like I was a conductor on a ride. But when I wasn't doing that, I felt more like a passenger on a ride. But even if you're a passive observer in this game, the characters and the writing are just so consistently excellent. I'm going to rate this a 7.5.
Nice. Excellent. I don't have very many questions because this game is so beautiful and I do kind of want to check it out myself. One of the things beyond just great character design in general, just based on what you said and watching the trailer, are some of these puzzles.
Mhm.
And some of these look like they have next to nothing to do with what you could possibly be investigating. And so that leads me to think that certain types of puzzles get repeated often. And so I guess I'm just curious, like, is each item like a one-off puzzle? How relevant are the puzzles themselves to the clue, or is it just a method for you to create inputs in a game that would otherwise just be a story?
That's a great question. This is the part of the game that a lot of people make comparisons to Professor Layton games.
Okay.
Professor Layton games are mystery games that are long, and there are tons of puzzles that are all different from each other, just sprinkled throughout these Professor Layton games. So it's like this story game where you're getting puzzles. And I think that's what's going on here is it's a narrative experience where it's giving you the excuse to solve puzzles. I would say that the puzzles don't feel like they fit into the story a ton. Some of the items that you're doing these puzzles on are items of a particular suspect. And the puzzle to get that item sometimes thematically makes sense with the person whose item that is.
Mhm.
So that's the closest tie, I would argue, to it. But a big positive is that I don't think ideas are repeated in these puzzles. There
Okay.
are a good dozen of them. And again, they each took like on the shortest side, probably 5 to 10 minutes, and then on the longest side, 30 minutes. And they all feel distinct. As I think back to all of them, none of them feel similar. Even though you're doing things like looking for patterns and looking for symbols and iconography with some of them,
Mhm.
the way they're executed is different.
Okay. I guess the only other question I have at the moment, does this game, prior to maybe Act 3 of the game, I would say, does this game sort of like push you into the direction of certain characters more than others, or is everybody getting a fair amount of screen time here? Because I love all these character designs.
I'd say it's pretty even. The first person you have to talk to is Flora. And then there's certain events in the story where you like have to go to the observatory or you have to go to the music room where Poppy is, just because you have the clues that you need to talk to that person, but you're not really talking to anybody for in my mind, too short of a time. I think
Mhm.
you get appropriate time with all 8 suspects.
So no one's like getting a little too friendly and maybe getting in on the investigation.
No, well, I mean, to say whether that happens either way would be a spoiler.
Yeah,
you know?
but
So, yeah.
that's something that I've noticed in recent whodunits.
Just before I forget, this is playable on PC, Mac, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, which is where I played it, Xbox One, and Apple Arcade. And although 7.5 isn't my highest score, I do add an asterisk on this score because it's a little bit elevated beyond a 7.5. Because when I got done with this, so much of it was like at least an 8 experience. And then the last third or so happened, and that's where I got a lot of the problems with this game happening to me. So it's the kind of game where, like, if you took 3 games that I've rated 7.5, and this is one of them, I might recommend this one above the other 2 just because it's just slightly elevated. It's not quite an 8.
Mhm.
Giving it an 8 didn't feel right. If we had a 40-point scale, I'd give it a 7.75, you know? So there's that. Also, I just learned about this the other night, like a week after I finished playing this game. This is the 3rd standalone game in the Grimoire series.
Oh.
There's a Detective Grimoire series.
No way.
So the first game is Detective Grimoire. Second game is Detective Grimoire: Secret of the Swamp. And that's the game where Sally was introduced. She wasn't in the first game. And so I didn't know about these until after I was like way done playing the game. But Tangle Tower is standalone, and they're working on a 4th game in the series, and it won't be Tangle Tower 2. It will be, again, its own thing. So I know I like to play, games in order. This didn't bother me as much because it's not like continuing the plot from 2 other games. So
Excellent.
there's that. But if you want to get in on Grimoire detective mysteries, there are other games, and that interests me. So those are our secret games, Terra Nil and Tangle Tower. Let's move on to our review of Cult of the Lamb. It is our featured game. So Cult of the Lamb is a 2022 base building and roguelite game. It was developed by Massive Monster and published by Devolver Digital. I will read the game synopsis from the Steam storefront. Quote, "Start your own cult in a land of false prophets, venturing out into diverse and mysterious regions to build a loyal community of woodland followers and spread your word to become the one true cult." End quote. So first I'll talk about the story a little bit. And when you first look at this game, it's cartoony. A lot of the characters are doe-eyed and just cute, very adorable. But these visuals are mixed with like this grim and shocking imagery surrounding curses and rituals.
Yeah.
So that's like one of the main draws to this game is like that intersection between those 2 ideas. And the game has this adorable morbidity is how I would explain it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to what we see in Night in the Woods and the end of Bug Snacks and especially Hollow Knight, right? Where there's like these cute characters, but then there's like some really mature things going on. But I would argue the contrast in Cults of the Lamb is more extreme. I think
of course.
like the violent stuff swings way harder than those other games. So we've seen this kind of thing before, but here it's really happening. And the story surrounds your character, who's a lamb, being sacrificed by 4 entities called bishops. And the bishops are these towering monstrosities who have like really jagged teeth and lots of creepy eyes. They're horrifying. And they have imprisoned someone called the One Who Waits in a realm called the Lands of the Old Faith. And there's this prophecy the bishops are trying to prevent by sacrificing this lamb. They heard that a lamb would be like the savior of the One Who Waits, or the One Who Waits would be able to escape imprisonment because of a lamb. And so the bishops are killing all the lambs in the land. And you're the last lamb. So they're like, we kill you and no more prophecy, baby. And so they kill you. They behead you and you wake up. And you actually wake up next to the One Who Waits after you're sacrificed. And the One Who Waits offers the lamb a chance to continue living as long as they create a cult in his name. And so the lamb receives this red crown, which provides powers of all kinds from the one who waits. And the lamb must use those powers to build a cult and slay the 4 bishops. And then the one who waits can be freed. Leaving the lands of the old faith, the lamb meets a brown rat named Ratau, I think is how we say that name.
Yeah.
Not exactly sure. But Ratau is responsible for helping you, especially in like the early game.
What if it's Rateau? Because there's another character named Ratu. I think Rateau and Ratu would sound good together.
Rateau. Let's go with that. So Rateau is like helping you out in the early game, helping you with like tutorials and stuff primarily, but then, shows up later. And Rateau is the previous vessel for the one who waits. So he kind of knows what's going on. He's done this before. He's done what the lamb has done before. The story goes, beyond that. There are surprises and reveals and things like that. But that's what I would say to set up the story. Now, onto the gameplay setup. And this is where I appreciate your help if you notice something I missed, because this game has a very large amount of systems and features.
Yeah.
Many dozens of systems and features. I think more so than any other game we've played.
Okay.
I challenge you to think of a game that has just as many.
Oh, just more feet. No, I don't think so.
Because I tried to think of there are games that are way longer than this game. There's Disco Elysium and Hades, which have hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue, but they don't have this number of gameplay features and systems. So the gameplay is split into 2 primary halves. We'll talk about the village management stuff first. So once the lamb gets these powers from the one who waits, the lamb can encounter different followers and recruit them into the cult. And they can be one of many species. You can recruit animals like deer, pigs, armadillos, frogs, as a few examples. But the list is extensive.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a skin where you're poop.
Yes.
So they get really weird too. And then when you indoctrinate them into your cult, you tell them to do all kinds of tasks for you. They can gather resources. They can build structures. They can pray to generate a resource called devotion. And when these followers are indoctrinated, you, as the player, have the option to rename them. You can choose their form and their appearance. And you can also see, this is something you can't change, but you can see what traits they have. Every follower comes with a random assortment of 1 to 3 traits that can be positive or negative. They can be things like this worker does this certain activity faster, or this worker loses so many faith when something happens. And so it's random. You don't get to change them, but that's kind of how they differentiate gameplay wise. And then followers have 3 areas to manage. You have to keep them fed, so you have to manage their hunger.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a sanitized, clean environment. So you have to clean up, after you make them meals to feed them, they need to poop.
Yep.
Or sometimes vomit.
Yep.
And you need to clean up that stuff, otherwise the sanitation goes down. And then there's faith, which is the most abstract one, but it might be the most important one. And this is the belief that your cult has in you and the one who waits. And faith is affected by hunger and sanitation. They kind of all affect each other. So basically, at the end of the day, you need to keep everybody happy. If there's a mess, clean it up, because otherwise people might get sick. And if they get sick, they will be unhappy, and then your faith will go down.
And maybe they'll die.
Maybe they'll die. And that will negatively impact other people. People will see that. Their faith will go down when people die. So it's just best to manage those 3 things as best you can. Followers can also become inspired if you give them sermons or if you bless them. And they will gain this resource called loyalty. Every single follower has a loyalty level. And when their loyalty gets high enough, they level up. And so you can level up followers over and over and over again. And the advantage in that is that higher leveled cultists are more effective in almost every way. They're more loyal. They will generate more devotion when they pray, those kinds of things. And then followers, when they pray at a shrine, that devotion they generate, that's how you unlock upgrades in your town. So you're getting devotion, it unlocks something called divine inspiration. And then you use your divine inspiration this is how you're getting like places for people to sleep. This is how you unlock like a farm to grow ingredients for meals, those kinds of things. The most important building, I think, is the temple. This is where you give your sermons to your followers, which increases their loyalty and their faith. This is also where you perform rituals that change their behavior or do something that you can't just do any moment. You can do a ritual where your followers won't go to sleep for several days and just keep working. You can do one where they don't get hungry. You can do a ritual where villagers come back to life if they died. And you mentioned cultists can die. They can grow old and die of old age. They can get sick, and if they're not healed, they might die. Or they can be sacrificed too, through rituals or sometimes other means. So how your cultists are treated is kind of up to you, especially when it comes to those rituals. And that is really all I had down on the village management stuff. Anything else you would add to that?
Nah, I would say that rituals are unlocked after declaring doctrines, and doctrines are also something that you have to unlock by increasing faith in your followers as well. So rituals are just a whole nother level of unlocking, just the same as the divine inspiration.
Yeah, leveling up that loyalty gets you these things called commandment stones. And that's what you're using to unlock all these doctrines. And yeah, doctrines are a choice. It's an either or between usually like a more good option and then a more evil option.
Yeah.
And I think there are 40 in the game, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And so there are lots of ways to customize those choices because every time you choose one, you can never choose the other thing in that playthrough. So then on to the dungeon crawling combat. When you perform sermons in your temple, you get these sermon points, which funnel into this whole other leveling system that affects your ability to explore the dungeons of the game. This is where you're unlocking new weapons. This is where you're unlocking new curses that you can cast. And we get to the other half of the gameplay here. This is the roguelite dungeon crawling, where runs are called crusades. Each of the 4 bishops has a dungeon, and you have to travel through each dungeon multiple times and beat these mini bosses to unlock the ability to fight the bishop of that dungeon. And each room in the dungeon is randomized. You can sometimes find weapons or curses, which are the hand-to-hand combat and secondary attacks of the game. You can fight a variety of minions of the bishops in the dungeons. And these guys do everything from standard melee stuff to shooting projectiles at you to exploding. And they kind of vary depending on which dungeon you're in, which bishop you're exploring.
Each dungeon kind of has a theme.
Yes.
So
there's like an underwater theme in one of them. There's like a spider web theme in another. And then in these dungeon rooms, you can also find lots of resources to buy things. You can find trapped animals who can be indoctrinated into your cult. You find special NPCs that unlock new areas to explore outside of your camp. You receive tarot cards that give you passive abilities that augment your run until it's over. Other really quick hit features, you can give followers gifts that give them powerful abilities. You can fish to make dishes and earn gold. Followers have quests for you that you can do to increase their faith. You can wear different fleeces on your lamb that give you various passive effects while you're in a crusade. There is a dice game called Knuckle Bones that you play with a few NPCs. It's kind of a mini game within Cult of the Lamb. And then you can decorate your village with cosmetic structures. This increases the faith of the cult, but you can highly customize how things look in this game. There are tons of cosmetic things.
Loads of things you can do.
So I know that was very long. It was a very long setup, but this game has a lot of features. And DiscoCola, we need to address an elephant in the room.
Okay.
As we sit down to record this episode.
Oh, okay, yes.
It is the eve of the release of Cult of the Lamb's first major DLC called Relics of the Old Faith. Relics of the Old Faith was announced a while ago. There was just a Nintendo showcase where they revealed the release date for this, and it is tomorrow.
Yeah,
as we're
literally
saying
tomorrow.
This episode won't come out for another several months, but we do this so far in advance that it's going to sound like it's not timely, but it is for us in this moment. The new DLC will have new story, challenges, follower forms, commands you can give to cultists, buildings, and features that increase combat variety. So it sounds extensive. It sounds like a pretty noteworthy amount of new features in the DLC. For the purposes of this review, we are not addressing the DLC. We're not going to talk about that. We're just looking at the base game. So just wanted to point that out for people curious.
I did play the Cultist edition,
Right.
and I don't know what was included in
Yeah.
that as far as
And
editions.
I don't think that's as substantial as
I think it's like
Relics of the Old Faith.
forms, maybe some forms.
And so we will still only refer to it as just Cult of the Lamb because Cultist Edition is not really as noteworthy. So DiscoCola, usually you go first with your thoughts on a featured game.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something about that? before we
Yeah,
begin?
so we're both big fans of consistency. I think we have a great formula of the show. But Bopo, I wondered if you might go first on Cult of the Lamb. The only reason I'm thinking of this at all is that I think you probably liked this game a little bit more than I did if I had to guess. And I love the way you articulate your thoughts. It's always so great to listen to. And I also think the way that you will talk about this maybe could help me reevaluate things that I don't have necessarily definitive opinions on.
Okay.
So instead of going first and giving a score and then coming back later like, yeah, you know what, Bopo, let me change my
Let me change
score
that.
because
it's
you're
actually,
so
it's you know
persuasive.
What? You made me realize how much I hate this game.
So I was wondering if maybe you would be willing to go first. I won't ask this of you all the time. I do like our formula, but would you please go first on Cult of the Lamb?
I can. And I'm very curious about where you're undecided on this game because I was undecided on a few things for
okay.
a long time. But then I feel like when I finished the game, I was able to come to decisions. And overall, I did enjoy Cult of the Lamb a lot. I really like this game.
Right.
So I will start with my likes. The gameplay loop is what I want to comment on first. The gameplay loop in Cult of the Lamb is so long and varied, and it's at the point where like I have a hard time wanting to stop playing this game because every little action you do goes a little further in helping you make your cult better. It's everything from the stuff you do in your camp to the dungeons. Every little thing you do. Maybe before you leave a dungeon room, you defeat the enemies and you want to move on to the next room, but you notice, oh, there's grass in the corner. Why don't I just cut that down? It'll take 2 seconds and I get some grass and I can use that to make a grass meal or build this structure or whatever. And so I'm constantly doing like little tasks that I know are funneling into helping my cult. Another example is when I'm in my camp, I just cannot pass by the shrine without collecting the devotion. And I do that 18 billion D times before I go into the dungeon. And it's like, I need to just move on and do the dungeon stuff, but I keep wanting to collect the resources. So it makes me hang on to all of these tasks. It has the Spiritfarer effect.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to call it, where you're multitasking, but you're also task switching so much. And that freshens up what you're doing moment to moment. There are either or choices I agonized over when it came to those doctrines, times when you need to pick the good one or the bad one. I remember respect your elders versus the good die young. These are two that have to do with when your villagers get older. And I remember just sitting there looking back and forth between the two and being undecided for a good 3 minutes. And I kind of arbitrarily picked one. When it's hard making these choices, you have two good choices. And so I found that happening a lot in Cult of the Lamb. The game made me constantly ponder an interesting question. And this is more of a neutral observation. It's not a huge praise and it's not a criticism. It's more just, I thought this was interesting to think about. Do I care more about my camp or do I care more about my performance during crusades? And the reason that question is so interesting is because both halves of that question are influencing each other just as much. They're both really important. Freeing the one who waits is the official goal of the story. So you might argue the dungeon crawling is what you should focus on because that's what releases the 4 chains, keeping him tied down. But maintaining the flock feels more noble. You come to know these flock members. They're really cute. They only want to do the right thing. And so you might get more attached to them if you're me. But I know that some players will want to like sacrifice them and treat them more as currency. And over time, spoiler alert for a thought later, I did kind of start to treat my cultists as currency rather than have like deep feelings for them. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the game takes these 2 disparate ideas of gameplay and they make them synergize successfully, in my opinion. Then there's the presentation. The game is cute and charming. The music is full of bops. The tribal hip hop with the catchy beats, never grew tired of those. And I didn't expect it to sound so hip, honestly. Like it's great exploring the dungeons and it's great in the camp. It's all awesome. The game is so impressively chock full of systems that work together. I'm amazed at the intelligence of the cult members. They will change jobs if they can no longer do their first job. If they're chopping down trees and then all the trees are gone, then they'll go do something else. So I didn't find myself having to go and reassign people unless I wanted more people praying for devotion because I wanted those unlocks. I would go around and change things here and there, but I found that a lot of the time I indoctrinated someone, I told them what to do, and then I never really went and spoke to them again unless I was blessing them or unless they like started to rebel and I assigned them to the prison, you know? So that's something we didn't mention is unhappy followers can speak out against you and they can try to encourage others to rebel. And so you need to like punish them or do something to them to prevent that from escalating further. So the game finds ways to reward you late in the game too. You can eventually unlock everything. You can max things out. It takes a long time. And I was worried about this game sort of like plateauing harshly. And it does a little bit of that. But I appreciated little things like when you max out your devotion, instead of cultists praying, generating devotion that you can no longer use, it turns into gold.
Yeah.
Love that I can still see that activity as useful because I was needing gold for tons of things. When you defeat the bishops, their dungeons become harder when you revisit them. And that's to match my lamb's increased power. And it makes it so that those dungeons don't become dull with just killing really easy enemies. So the game is scaling with you a little bit. And I appreciate that so that the end doesn't plateau. All the characters are great in this game. I have a favorite character, and it is a grasshopper smuggler NPC called Plimbo. This is one of the guys that has one of the side areas that you can explore, and it mostly has to do with how he looks and how he sounds. But this is the guy that's like, you know, like that's how he talks. It's just like you had someone, I just picture someone sitting in front of a microphone doing those voices, and it just cracks me up. So I love Plimbo. Might make my list at the end of the season of favorite characters, but we got a lot of games to play. We'll see. And then other tiny praise. I actually really like Knuckle Bones as a minigame.
Okay.
Because it's so simple. It's a great distraction. It's unique. I've never seen it before in a game. It's not incredibly deep, but you're never playing it for that long. And it just breaks things up really well. And I liked the excitement of like, oh, what am I going to roll? And oh, he put a 6 down and now my 6s are gone. Dang it. You know, I just haven't seen that game before. And I liked that. So it's nothing on the level of like Gwent from The Witcher, which is way deeper. But I liked it. My dislikes. I do have dislikes with this game. And a lot of it has to do with, backing up a little bit, I was really impressed with all the systems happening in concert.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be a lot of confusion about what's what, especially in the first like 3 or 4 hours. It is very challenging to keep all the systems straight at first. When you think about praying, which creates devotion, which creates divine inspiration, which allows for town upgrades. Then you've got loyalty and faith, which sound like the same thing almost, but loyalty is individual and faith is flock-wide. And then you've got the temple where you do sermons, rituals, crowns, and doctrines. And each of those are very different. And doing the sermons creates sermon points, which provides sermon upgrades. And devotion upgrades and sermon upgrades additionally have tiers of unlocks where you can't unlock higher level versions of things until you have enough lower level things at first. So like keeping all that in my mind is like, it's so confusing. And actually creating my notes, I had to look back at the wiki for this game and just look up the nomenclature.
Yeah, just the words for it.
When you're talking to someone else about this game, I imagine it's hard to like give advice unless you know the exact nomenclature and they know exactly what you're talking about, because I kept confusing loyalty and faith and devotion points. Wait, getting the dungeon upgrades, does that come from my shrine or does that come from my temple? I kept confusing everything. So it's just a lot going on. And I would argue even at the end of the game, it's a lot to keep track of. I don't like managing elders for a couple reasons. I don't mind the idea of villagers getting old and then they can no longer work. But it feels like they grow old pretty fast. Like they're only working a couple in-game weeks and then they become old and frail and they cannot do anything for you. They are just a mouth to feed. And when you recruit a lot of people around the same time, that means that they might all grow old at the same time. And there's just like a tragedy waiting to happen with just all of a sudden the effectiveness of your cult goes way down when all those people grow old. So I didn't like managing that when I had a moment of 5 or 6 people growing old within a few in-game days. That got frustrating. So I wish maybe they just lived a little longer or there was something more to do with the elders. There are ways to get around it. You can sacrifice them. But with my gameplay style, I didn't like doing a lot of the elder stuff. They are very cute. I like how they put on the white robe and they're like hunched over. They've got the cane.
They've got the wrinkles on
They
their
got the
face.
wrinkles. They look so cute.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're going to die soon. So it's just,
Jeez.
But again, it's that adorable morbidity of like, they're going to die soon, but they also look so cute as old people. Flock members have traits. We mentioned that a second ago. I found that the traits are a great idea for adding variety, but a lot of those traits were just marginal differences, and I didn't really care about what they did. So like, this worker works 10% slower than everybody else. And I just would read that and go, am I even going to like care or know about that?
Yeah.
I'd forget that. So it's just extraneous things that I don't really need to know. The game freezes at the start of days. I don't know if this happened to you, but when I was in my camp and a new day started, there was like a 3 or 4 second delay where the game just froze every day. And it really broke the flow of gameplay. I know that 3 or 4 seconds doesn't sound like that much, but when it's happening every day, and I lived 98 in-game days in this game, so it was happening a lot. I kept thinking the game was going to freeze and like crash. And I was like worried every time it happened. I was like, oh my gosh, is the game going to crash? This one's like the longest one yet. And it wouldn't crash. It never crashed. But I don't like that slowdown whenever the new day starts. When you're placing buildings on your grid in your camp, that is frustrating because the grid has diagonal lines and trying to jump to a different plane, like a different diagonal plane, sometimes you shift upwards or to the side. You don't go to where you want to go. And so I don't get what I desire when I'm trying to shift buildings around. That's all my frustrations with the camp stuff. My frustrations with the dungeon crawling, there aren't as many of them, but one of them is pretty significant. And that's that the combat in the dungeons doesn't really evolve much beyond rolling to dodge and attacking. And that's kind of it. You can find different weapons that have different speeds and different ranges, and you can find different curses that might be ranged or they might be like a variation on your melee attack. But I found that just the DNA of the combat didn't change a lot if I got a different quote unquote build or set of items. So it just feels pretty shallow when it comes to the combat in the dungeons. And then lastly, for criticisms, some dungeon rooms become awkward because of the RNG, and it has to do with layout. There are times when you walk into a very large room and there's like one small enemy in the very center and it takes one hit to kill, and then that's the room. And then there are other times when the RNG activates on the inverse, where it's like a super tiny room and then there are like 6 enemies and one of them hits you before you even have time to react, or one of them explodes and you just can't get away because the room is so small. So I wish there were more boundaries to keep that mismatch from happening between like the room size and the number of enemies. So overall, I don't think Cult of the Lamb is an Animal Crossing killer with its like village, town management stuff, nor do I think it's a Hades killer in terms of its dungeon crawling and combat. But I do think it is a satisfactory accomplishment of both things. And there's a saying in game development that I've heard that goes something like all 8s make a 10. And what that means is you can take a game with tons of features and systems, and if each of those aspects of the game isn't perfect, like a 10 out of 10, but if they're all an 8 out of 10, then that consistency across the board will raise the whole experience up. And lots of players will see that as not just a great game, but an excellent game, an outstanding game. And I think there's a little bit of that going on in Cult of the Lamb, where I don't think it is 8s across the board. I think everything it's doing is like a 7 or a 7.5 across the board. But because it all works so well together, it's all these disparate feeling things that somehow can coexist in this game, and it accomplishes it all. I think that's really impressive, and it's still really addictive and fun. So it's a game of like 7s and 7.5s, and that consistency elevates it up to an 8.5 for me. That's the score I landed on.
That's the score you're giving it.
Yeah.
Okay. 8.5 for Cult of the Lamb. Cool. Rock on. Well, I will move on to my thoughts, if that's okay.
For sure.
I have a couple of notes here that are just like when I was starting out, I was typing as I was going, and then the rest are just kind of likes and dislikes mixed up, unfortunately. But the very first thing I wrote down is that, damn, this game feels great to play. I loved dodge rolling, and I had a pretty average to quick speed weapon, which is generally what I gravitate to. Just
like a sword.
Yeah, in most games.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. I loved the attack time that I had. I eventually did get attacks with a longer wind up, and those were a bit more difficult for me to manage. One of the things that was initially appealing to me, but actually ended up taking loads of time as I was going through the game, was naming my followers.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I had told you that I had committed before beginning the game that all of my followers would be named after characters from previous Underplayed games. And I stuck to that.
Okay.
But to make it like less random and arbitrary, I decided to keep whatever form the follower possessed when it came to me from indoctrination, and I only changed the color and or the variant.
Okay.
So this forced a bit of discipline on deciding which character each follower would become, but it also meant that I spent like at least 2 minutes per follower scrolling through our previous episodes so I could find like the perfect analog, because it's like I got a giraffe once, and I'm like,
so you tried to find the meaning.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I got a giraffe. I'm like, who the hell are you gonna be?
Someone who's tall.
Someone who's tall. So I picked Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club.
Oh,
because she's kind of tall, and nothing
Interesting.
else matched it quite as well.
So when you told me about your idea, I actually wanted to steal it. I did steal your idea. I probably didn't pick the same names as you because we have so many characters to pick from. And what I did is, before I started playing, I went through all of our games, and I just chronologically, I wrote down names from all of our games, and I only got through like season 2 games. And what I did is, instead of trying to find meaning, I just did assign them from the top to bottom, like chronologically.
Yep.
So season 1, episode 1 names, those were the first names I assigned followers. So I'm naming people Vincent and Leo,
Exactly.
you know, on the first jump. So
those two were kind of like throwaway ones. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. You're a short animal, Leo. Who cares?
Sure.
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
But that ended up taking a lot of time, just in the real world hours. So there's certain points in the game where I am asked to basically submit or fight, essentially. And when I pick fight, it doesn't feel like a significant punishment because the combat in those rooms especially are pretty easy. However, other punishments feel really severe. Like, for example, I chose to lose half of a heart instead of sacrificing 2 followers to somebody. And I still didn't like totally understand the extent of some of the collectibles, like the permanent red hearts.
And that was permanent across all runs?
That's permanent.
Oh.
I permanently am down half of a red heart, and
There's no way to get it back.
there's
right?
no way to get it back as far as I know. And I thought that I could just like gain more red hearts.
Yeah.
But that's not
was this
the case.
Was this with a bishop or was it with like the red wolf?
It's with the wolf.
Okay,
Yeah.
I did the opposite. I sacrificed the 2 followers not because I knew what the other one did. It's because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
I was trying to be as nice as a cult leader as I possibly could all the way through just today when I came to the station to record. But I also perma sacrificed a follower to someone, and I didn't understand what the consequences of that would be.
Oh, what do you mean by perma sacrifice?
So you can resurrect characters that you sacrifice if
Exactly,
you
yes.
choose that doctrine.
I did that a ton.
But if you sacrifice a follower to Midas,
Oh,
that
you can't
character's
get them
gone.
back. Oh, so I did that too.
Yeah.
I never tried to resurrect those people.
Well, the
That makes
first
sense.
one I picked was Greg, named for Night in the Woods.
Yes.
Character I didn't like, but was one of my first followers in the cult. So I
So
tried
it's-
to keep him around the
So it's
longest.
like a higher level one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But once I tried to resurrect him, he was gone. From
Oh, man.
selection. So
well, he's got to live in the gold.
yeah, apparently. Anyways, the
that area's messed up, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point is that consequences are inconsistent and not totally clear before you select what's about to happen
I
to you.
agree with that.
I found that the economy gets pretty meaningless pretty quickly. The hardest things for me to maintain were actually elements found on runs, like grass and silk and bones.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all my faith-based, loyalty-based unlocks done before I even made it to Anchor Deep for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So I cleared Darkwood, cleared Anura, and I already had everything done.
Yeah.
Essentially,
It's a lot of the dungeon specific stuff that you just don't have on hand because you can only get this in Anchor Deep,
right.
for instance. Yeah.
Fishing, I guess this one counts as a dislike. I never felt like fishing was worth the time. As far as I can tell, it doesn't pause the in-game time.
It does not.
And so I'm spending a full day or more just to clear a pier full of fish.
Yeah.
And the fish meals take up so many of the fish that I catch way too quickly.
That's fair. Did you get the bountiful fishing ritual?
I did.
Okay.
Well, no, I didn't.
Okay. I only fished when I activated that ritual. Otherwise, I found that fishing was not even remotely worth your time.
Yeah.
When you do the ritual, you catch twice as many fish and you can find rarer fish more easily.
Okay.
So otherwise, if I didn't have that ritual activated, I did not fish.
Yeah. I've played games where the fishing mini game like pauses time while your line is cast. If that simple change was made,
Yeah.
it would be worth it to me. Totally different.
I
but-
think even Knucklebones continues the in-game time.
Oh, is that right?
Mhm,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Like you said, music is great overall. It was a little bit of a slow burn for me just because I'm hearing the same songs at base camp constantly compared to the music on the Crusades. But I did listen to the full album while I was doing chores a couple of times. And now it rules. And this is something that I would say plays well on the radio.
Hey, heckers.
So that's a like. I liked getting weapons that produced poison. I think that was my
Mhm.
favorite bonus effect on weapons. But what I liked more was getting the tarot card that added poison damage, while maybe getting a weapon that produced a ghostly spirit. So I
Yes.
get both of those extra bits of damage. My favorite spells are ones that are quick release ranged spells, mainly the one that has homing or produces ghosts.
Yes.
Stuff that I have to take the time to aim to even matter. I just didn't use them.
Yeah. There's one where you cause a fissure, and then out of that fissure comes ghosts that then like home in on enemies.
Yeah,
I love
that
things
one's
like that.
fun. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem to do as much damage as like the 3 homing shots,
Right.
but very cool. Love the idea of just ghosts homing in on enemies. Another like is the overall design and aesthetic is very appealing. I love the consistency across the totally different animal types. Like their head, each of their heads is a different shape, but their eyes and mouth appear in such funny places because
Yes.
it's a side profile of this animal
Yeah,
head.
they have to represent everything on just one side.
Yeah, so you have this like elephant head, but its mouth is totally where a mouth would not be on an elephant. But
That
it's
just makes-
consistent across
and
the board.
It makes them cuter that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Here's a dislike, I guess. I absolutely hate Anchor Deep and Calamar so much. I've been trying for the trophies where you beat each bishop without damage, and I have yet to get the Calamar one.
I have a story about that, actually. That's one of my anecdotes to share.
Good.
Yep.
I'm ready to hear it. I got Leshy first try. Hecate took about 4 tries.
Yeah, same.
He was a bit of a struggle to get through Anura, also compared to Silk Cradle and Darkwood. And I beat Shimura damageless on like my second fight against him.
Yeah.
But Calamar and Anchor Deep,
Mhm.
man, I'm trying to use the Gold Fleece method, which means your damage input increases by 5% for every enemy you kill in the
Okay.
dungeon. But if you take damage, it resets back to standard damage output.
Okay. I have, so in a moment, I'll give you my strat. It's that strategy, but there's a additional bonus strat on top of it.
Okay.
So
All right. I'll keep that in mind. But this leads me to like the overarching dislike of Anchor Deep, which is cramped rooms and projectiles, but especially projectiles and extra especially projectiles in cramped rooms.
mm-hmm.
I have this problem in the game overall, but it's the worst in Anchor Deep.
Yeah.
And that leads to another thing that's like a struggle with the balance and weapon types. I usually tend to prefer like quick gameplay melee attacks and therefore prefer quicker weapons, but I can't do enough damage output to beat bosses like Calamar quick enough before I get hit with one of his several
Yes.
dozens of projectiles.
Yes, you got to use a hammer or an axe.
But the heavier weapons are so much slower that roll dodging becomes so much
Yeah.
more difficult. And like you still get the animation cancel if you roll dodge, but it just doesn't feel balanced against the amount and the speed of projectiles in certain situations.
Yeah.
That's a huge sore spot for me, and I know that the solution is just get good, scrub. But
well, there is an imbalance because you're unlocking through the sermon upgrades, you're unlocking like, oh, now you can find godly weapons, all those different levels of weapons. And even when you find like a godly dagger, it just does a mere fraction of what a godly axe or hammer or even sword does.
Mhm.
And so it's just like the dagger is never a viable weapon for those trophies, killing the bosses without getting hits.
Yeah.
The hammers and swords, I saw some of them going up into the 20s. I never saw a dagger that was over 10 or like even approaching that. So it's just weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, struggles there. I tried a couple more times this morning before I came in and still didn't get it. Knucklebones, I think this is a fun and unique game, but I don't crave it like I do Bug Fable Spy Cards or anything like that.
Mhm.
Sort of what you said about The Witcher. It seems like it could be a good way to double money in the early part of the game, but I was already getting gold pretty quickly, pretty early, so I never really felt the need to utilize it as like a method to maintain resources. So beyond getting the trophy of going against everyone once, I didn't really play Knucklebones too much because
Okay.
it's fun, but I didn't love it.
I didn't play it more than I needed to for the trophy, but I liked when I played it.
Yeah. So anyways, all of those things Cult of the Lamb that is a game that I think is incredibly fluid and satisfying in combat and movement, with mostly reasonable difficulty. But if you're not even interested in the combat, there is just maintaining your cult. This game is 2 games in one, and I think that's pretty neat. Those 2 games influence each other, but can still be enjoyed entirely separately for the most part. But it is greater than the sum of its parts. I have some frustrations, but none of them are issues that are outside of the scope of reasonable. It doesn't quite create the craving I get for quick little run in other roguelikes like Hades, but every time I do turn it on, I find myself struggling to put it down. I do love this game, and I think I am also going to give it an 8.5.
Okay. Is any of what I said influential in that score?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. We're both at an 8.5. So man, there's a lot of places we could go to for like discussions, but since you just mentioned it, I would like to talk about the Anchor Deep stuff. This is how I beat the Anchor Deep boss without getting hit,
Okay.
because I had a similar experience to you. How I beat Calamar is in Anchor Deep. I had the Golden Fleece, so you already know about that strat. You have to defeat enemies in the dungeon to build up your total damage. If you get hit, that gets reset, though.
Which happens to me a lot.
Happened to me a lot. What you need to do, my friend, look for a charger jellyfish. I think it's the charger jellyfish. It's one of the jellyfish in the dungeon that spits out 2 little like explosive projectiles that kind of float toward you.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you kill one of those little projectiles, because you can hit those, it adds the 5% like it's a normal enemy.
Ooh.
And if you don't kill the jellyfish that emits it, it'll just keep summoning those projectiles. And I sat there for like 20 minutes farming those, and I got up to like 600% damage. You just have to find a room with one of these jellyfish that emits those 2 at a time. And when you hit them, they become projectiles that can hurt enemies. So you have to hit them not toward the jellyfish. You have to angle yourself so that you're hitting them away from the jellyfish.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I did that. It took like 20 minutes of farming. And you also have to make sure, because you're getting up to like 500, 600% damage, it doesn't really matter if you pick which slow weapon you pick, but you got to pick one of the slow weapons that has high base damage. Because if you think about the math, if you're picking a dagger that has a base damage of 2 or a hammer that has a base damage of 15, if you have 6 times damage on your dagger, it's only going to do 12 damage each hit. If you have 6 times damage on a 15 damage hammer, it's going to do a lot more, and it's going to hurt him it's going to kill him in like 2 hits.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I had to do. It's the combination of finding that jellyfish, farming, not getting hit on the way to Calamar once you've built up a just crazy amount of damage, and then find that hammer, find that axe. It has to be a hammer or an axe.
Okay.
And that's how you do it. Otherwise, I would not be able to do it legitimately.
Rock on. Well, I thought about trying that, but I couldn't hit those enemies while also at the same time watching if my damage was going up against those lesser enemies, because I was just, so overwhelmed in most of the rooms that had that.
When it worked for me, it was like a medium-sized room, and there were several enemies that spawned, and I defeated all of them except the jellyfish. And then there was just enough width in the room that I could avoid the jellyfish when I hit the projectiles.
Cool. All right, I'll give that a shot. Hopefully this nightmare will be over. I have one other trophy I still have to get.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the hardest thing in the game, I think. What is your playtime, and how many cultists did you end up recruiting? Just curious.
Playtime, well, I'm on in-game day 165.
Holy moly.
I was at like 120 something before I could beat the game. I struggled a lot in Anchor Deep, just in general, but not just trying for the trophy.
Okay. Do you know how many hours?
It's over 24. My clock says 1 day and so many hours.
That makes sense.
It might be 34, but
okay.
Currently I have 16 living followers. I have room for 25, and I have 45 followers that have passed on, maybe more depending on how the save file screen counts things like Midas sacrifices
Oh,
or
yeah.
characters that have been ascended.
Yeah, it's
Because
hard.
I've ascended a few.
It was hard for me to tell on what the rules are there, but
Yeah.
the game says that I had 41 total cultists recruited, 98 in-game days. I played it for about 18 and a half hours. And when I made my list of names from all the past games, it just so happens that with my 41 total cultists recruited, I got through exactly my list of season 1 names without touching my season 2 names.
Oh,
So
really?
there's a really clear endpoint where my last names are from Outer Wilds,
Nice.
which was the 10th episode of season 1. And it just happened that way. I didn't plan for that.
Awesome.
So I didn't end up dipping into the season 2 at all, but I liked how cleanly that ended up happening.
Okay. Well, based on followers and names, wait, did you have a point about getting connected with your
I did.
Okay,
yeah.
okay,
I was going to
well,
do that next.
yeah.
Yeah. So like how attached I got to them ended up changing over time, where I wasn't naming them names of like people I know. I know some people do that, and then it's like really emotional. But I was just naming them the names from past games. And I found that I got attached, just like you, like to the early ones who leveled up more because they're more effective. But that's about where it ended. And I was just curious if you ever felt like if someone got sacrificed or someone died, did you feel a gut punch?
I don't think it ever got as far as a gut punch because I was very protective of some of the ones that were my favorites.
Okay. So you were keeping tabs on them constantly. You know they're not going to die.
Yeah. And if they did, I made sure that they were coming back.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I sacrificed permanently Greg to Midas, and I didn't understand that. And even though I don't like Greg as a character, I was just like, oh man, it felt more like a waste of time. So I wouldn't call it a gut punch, but it's just like, I didn't mean to do that, you know?
Mhm.
It was more shame. But yeah, eventually, I think once marriage became a mechanic in the game, most of the spouses were ones I became attached to.
So you married multiple people?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, because multiple people gave me the quest to become married to them.
Oh.
So
and you didn't want to lose the faith from failing the quest.
Yeah.
Got it.
Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have ever married anybody.
Yeah.
But here comes Red from Transistor, and she's like, I'm in love with you. We should get married. I was like, okay.
Okay.
And then I ended up marrying the entirety of the literature club and the sealed vessel from Hollow Knight.
That's so random. I love that.
Yes.
That's messed up.
Some of those were choices, some of those were quests, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I know which ones were choices. You don't have to tell me. I would have married Yuri. Anyway, going back to our best girl conversation, but I was afraid to marry more than one person. I did, unlock the one where you can, it's a ritual where you can marry someone. I married Vincent, one of the first ones.
Yeah, good.
And then I remember when I unlocked marrying, it said, you can marry more than one flock member, but if you marry more than one person, they might get jealous of each other and that could cause a fight. And that scared me.
Yeah.
So I was like, ooh, no. So even if I got a quest from someone, hey, will you marry me? I rejected it and I just took the hit on my faith. And then I built back my faith. But I also had a ritual where flock members' faith would remain at the same spot, not increase, not decrease for like 2 or 3 days. I used that ritual constantly.
Okay.
Because times when that wasn't activated, I hated managing the faith and trying to find ways to increase the faith. And I've got to build this like decoration so that the faith goes up 5. I don't want to do that. I just want to go back to the dungeon, or I want to build something that matters. So I was attracted to that ritual. Anytime you reject a quest while that ritual's active, it doesn't impact your faith.
Nice.
So I was hella rejecting quests when I had that ritual activated. And on the sacrificing stuff, like the Midas events, even though I wasn't like terribly attached to my cultists and I was kind of seeing them as currency after a certain while, I was trying to find meaning in who I sacrificed. For Midas, I sacrificed people who were newer, who weren't as high leveled, not because I knew that they would be gone permanently, but because I knew, hey, if I get rid of a level 1 person, it's not a huge difference. I can just recruit someone in 10 minutes.
Mhm.
It's fine.
Yeah. After I realized the consequences of Midas, I started sacrificing people whose names I spelled wrong, or maybe
Oh,
there were
there you
better
go.
forms for it. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well,
Erase
you
this
just
mistake.
you don't
Yeah.
exist.
Right. And for the red wolf that you mentioned, there came the point where I needed to either give up the half of the heart or sacrifice to followers. And I chose the latter. And this is where I made kind of a poetic decision. And I don't know if you remember the Gardens Between. It was my 8th secret game from season 1. That game is about two best friends, Arena and Frent. It's a game about childhood friendship. It is a wholesome, cozy, relaxing, polished game. And for the Red Wolf, I was thinking like, who can I sacrifice? Like I need to do 2, and I kind of want them to make sense with each other. And then I thought, ooh, I could sacrifice 2 best friends, and then they don't have to like live without the other. And so I sacrificed Arena and Frent to the Red Wolf.
Nice.
So they died together.
Poor children.
I was just curious if you had an ideal number of cultists, like the number of cultists where you think your camp is just singing because you've got this right number. It's not too many where you're like, oh, I got to feed all these mouths.
Yeah.
But it's not too few where it's like, oh, I can only have so many people praying. I can only have so many people gathering resources. I need more. What's the ideal number?
Well, early game, it's hard to say because food became difficult just in general. I was pretty much feeding grass meals, and then once I got cauliflower meals. But now that I can just buy fish with my endless money at this point, food's no longer an issue. But I do notice that this morning I ran out of fertilizer for the first time for my farm. I don't have enough fertilizer for all my farm plots.
Sure.
So I don't know. I feel like between 15 and 18 is like a great number, especially if you have higher level people that you keep resurrecting. Like you're getting so much gold every like 2 minutes, and it's you don't have to worry about anything except rebuilding stone mines and lumber mills essentially after a while.
Yeah, I got to the point at the end when all my devotion unlocks ran out. I was just getting the gold. I got up to like 10,000 gold that I'm never spending, because the game runs out of expensive things to buy with that gold. I think it's 13. That's just where I noticed when I had 13 or so, that's when I was able to comfortably get resources and things built and also like leave my camp without having to manage too much when I wanted to go do that dungeon exploring. I have the annoyance with the elderly, and I had an idea of like how the game could add a feature. And I don't know if this will be in the game with the new DLC or whatever, but I wish I could build like a retirement center so that elderly people can maybe live longer or they could contribute in some way. Like maybe they can pray at the retirement center or something. I found that annoyances in the game are solved with buildings or systems or features. I wish all of this food that's at the farm, I wish I didn't have to pick that. Well, you can solve that by having followers become your farmers, for instance. So I wish there was something for the elderly in the game like that.
That makes sense.
Did you have something like that? Did you have a feature you wish could be like fixed or addressed?
That's a good question. Honestly, I can't keep up with the amount of devotion that I get. And that happened pretty early on. Like I was leaving that statue with just full devotion constantly.
Yeah, because it builds up way before you're done with a dungeon.
Yeah.
And so then you think, oh, I could have been gathering. That's why I just could not leave that shrine.
Yeah. Just this morning, it took like 2 minutes for it to refill again. I'm like,
yes.
Good God, guys, just like go have a soda or something.
Yeah.
Just give me a break.
I know. Stop being so good at praying.
Just some of the like smaller items. I wish there was a better way to farm it. And again, I'm going back to what I was running low on today, and that's fertilizer.
Okay.
And like sometimes you can run into a fertilizer room in Crusades, but that's very rare.
Yeah.
And you can't.
No. I never had a lot of fertilizer. I never had more than like 70.
you can't necessarily like easily force your followers to poop, not without like negative consequences too.
Right.
So, yeah, just that. And then if I could leave a plot in the ground where I could replace fallen stone mines or lumber mills
Yeah.
without just basically starting over from scratch and hoping that I got it in the exact right spot that I want it.
Like just a refresh.
Yeah.
Just
It-
like,
it-
put the resources back in. Instead, when that stuff runs out, it just disappears.
Yeah. I think that's the most annoying thing that I have to deal with, other than just like placing things on that grid system, which sucks, like you said.
Well, I have one more little anecdote, and it is a surprise from this game that might make my list of surprises at the end of the season, but it's when Shimura, the fourth bishop, turned my followers against me and I needed to kill them. And they were like, I'm sorry, master, we don't want to do it, but their bodies are possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of counts as a sacrifice. It counts as them dying. Shocking. And I was in no control over who Shimura was picking in that moment. And it happened a couple times.
Yeah.
So that moment stuck with me. And it actually is like something that is outside of your control. That's where I felt, I think, the most emotionally invested in my cultists, because I'm in control of so much of their lives, except for times when they're just taken from me.
Mm-hmm.
And just fighting them feels awful.
Yeah. The first time that happened to me, it was Sayori, which was at that point one of my spouses as well.
Oh, dang.
And you know me, I'm a Sayori fan in the first place. So,
I know.
But it didn't matter because I resurrected her immediately when I got home. So
yeah, that's one that doesn't stay permanent, thankfully. Yeah. Did you have any other anecdotes or anything about the game? Any notes?
For a few in-game days, maybe like close to 20, I really enjoyed hunting spiders at night. That's weirdly satisfying.
Yeah, don't they drop a little devotion or gold?
Oh, not necessarily. They drop a morsel that you can cook with. Oh,
that's right.
Yeah.
You can cook with. They steal gold.
That's
what they do.
And it's even more fun when they are carrying something.
Yeah. I was thinking of the wisp things. Those have devotion.
Those have devotion. I didn't really bother with those too much. That's my little anecdote. Hunting spiders was kind of fun.
I didn't discover that until many hours into the game.
You totally by accident. I just all of a sudden there was this squish noise when I was trying to do something else. I'm like, oh, you can interact with these guys. Didn't know.
Yep. And there's other little creatures like squirrels you can find in the dungeons, and those give you more souls too. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about with this game. But I'm glad we both really enjoyed it for the combination of effective systems that it is. And I'm just impressed that two disparate kinds of gameplay can come together in such a unique way in Cult of the Lamb. That is our review of Cult of the Lamb. You can play it on PC, Mac, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. We both rated it an 8.5. That's the end of this episode of Underplayed. You can find more of our episodes at kzum.org/underplayed and on common podcast services like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Our music was composed by Jack Rodenberg. Our art comes from Onimochi. Underplayed is on Twitter at underplayedpod. You can find me on Twitter at BoPo. That's BO_PO. I'm also on the GG app at BoPo, where you can see my game lists and what I'm currently playing.
And I am at DiscoCola, currently on Twitter, as well as the GG app, with not much to show still, but working on it. I am also on Twitch under that same handle.
Next time, we will have 2 more secret games to review, and our featured game will be Into the Breach, a strategy game developed by Subset Games. Until then, everyone, keep on playing.